everyone. For those who've not seen me before, my name is Phil Wainwright, and I've been around the SaaS and cloud business since before we started calling it that. I founded a website in 1998 called aspnews.com because at the time we talked about application service providers. And I haven't told our hosts this, but actually in 1999 I was briefed on the launch of a new online service called McAfee.com. So these guys have been around for a long time, and I was actually there at the birth. I like to say that I've been in this business for so long I know where all the skeletons are buried. If you want to find out the backstory, come up and see me later on. In 2005, I became the resident SaaS blogger on ZDNet, and I've done that for 8 years. Last year, I became a co-founder of a website called Diginomica, and with 4 other co-founders, all of us with a lot of experience covering the enterprise computing landscape. And what we do with Diginomica is we cover how enterprises are adopting these emerging technologies for business outcomes. And so we spend a lot of time talking to enterprise customers across the world, obviously a lot in the UK, because several of us are based in the UK, but also in the US and Europe and elsewhere. And one of the things I think is surprising is how much change is going on at the moment. And that's part of what this presentation is about, to really understand the context in which getting your head in the cloud is something that everyone in the IT industry needs to do now. So the agenda we're going to talk about, first of all, I want to give you that business context, market context for what's going on. And then talk a little bit about the subject matter today, which is security and that whole issue of safety in the cloud, which is always the first issue that comes up when people are thinking about the cloud. Is it going to be safe for me? Want to dig into the cloud security market to understand how much of it is in the cloud already and what the trends are around that. And talk about the SME market in the UK and SME market adoption of cloud. Now, when we say SME, it's often a confusing term because people immediately start thinking about, well, is that small businesses? SAP, that application vendor, considers SME to be any business turning over less than $1 billion a year. So it's quite a big market segment, and we often talk about mid-market as an alternative term. So when I say SME, I think I'm talking about the larger businesses that there are still thousands of them. That's an addressable market here in the UK, and millions of them worldwide. But I'm talking about those larger businesses that typically people in the partner channel are working with. And then finally, I want to round off by just talking a little bit about cloud business models. It's always a worry when we're moving to a new environment, particularly with the new subscription-based model that cloud delivery involves, and some of the other issues around that. And a little peek about what the future might hold as we move into more cloud-based business models, not only as an IT industry, but actually across the economy as a whole. Because the reason that we're talking about cloud today is because the whole nature of business has changed. In probably the past 10 years, even the past 5 years, there's been an enormous change, and it's been brought about by technology. But it's not just technology that we have to think about when we think about cloud computing. One of the mistakes that we make in the IT industry is that we always think that every problem is a technology problem. At the end of the day, the only reason people buy technology is because they want to solve business problems and they're looking for better business outcomes. And the role that technology is playing in the world of business today is that it is speeding everything up. It's making it much more difficult to keep pace with the technology that the average business has got in place, because everyone is now connected. Everyone is walking around with these smartphones in their pockets, or these tablets that didn't even exist a few years ago. This week we've celebrated the 50th anniversary of the IBM mainframe, the System 360, which was launched in 1964. It's only 5 years since the iPhone came out, but the iPhone has probably changed our lives as much as the mainframe has. So the world is changing because of these incredibly sophisticated devices that we all carry around with us now, and the fact that they're connected into a global computing network called the internet, or the cloud as we like to call it now, with all this amazing computing capability. And increasingly businesses and customers expect to have that computing capability and resource available to them. So for example, distance has been contracted and collapsed by this internet that we're all connected to now, so that we can work wherever we are. We can do business with people wherever they are, and indeed people from the other side of the world come into our market and compete with us. Increasingly, we can get hold of resources and connect to them and deploy them instantly, because we can connect to them across the internet instead of having to order a server and get it delivered and get it up and running and then your computing starts working. No, you can actually get it instantly and you can start to do things. We all take for granted now the fact that you can search instantly for information because of this thing called Google, the on-demand search engine. I can remember the days when search engines didn't exist and you had to look everything up in books. Good God, imagine going back to those days. And increasingly we expect everything to happen instantly. We don't want to wait for things anymore. When the mainframe first came in, everything in business was done by paper flying around. And before anything happened in business, paper had to move from one physical location to another physical location. You had to wait for the post to arrive before you knew what orders you had coming in that day. Today, those orders come in 24/7, electronically, instantly, and the moment the order arrives, the customer expects to know when you're going to deliver, and to track that delivery as it progresses on its way to you. The whole world has completely changed because we're all connected into this computing environment, and it keeps on changing. And the computing you have in your business has to be ready to cope with that change, and has to evolve as the whole market evolves and as the computing technology continues to evolve and race ahead. And finally, it's an extremely collaborative market and business economy that we're in now, because customers expect not just to be advertised to and to be delivered to, but they expect to actually have a conversation with you. If you don't respond to their complaints immediately, they're on social media telling everyone about it. So you have to have this ability to partner with your customers, with your suppliers. You have to be able to bring teams together quickly to resolve problems as quickly as possible, and indeed to look at the innovations and opportunities ahead of you. So all of these different factors in business today really brought about by the technology and the way that people are using technology. And so what we see today is that people are adopting technology mainly because the business people are saying, I need to do this now, I need to do this faster, I've got to have this capability that didn't exist last year. And the technology people are struggling to keep up. So my term for this is frictionless enterprise. The context being that in the past, the whole theory of the firm, the whole theory of the enterprise was that you had to have a big enterprise with everything in-house, because that was the only way you could get resources quickly that did what you needed. There were all these barriers to going outside, to getting external resources, but now in the past decade those barriers have started to move away, to melt away, and we've started be able to work in a much more frictionless way by taking away all of those barriers of distance and time and access to resources that used to slow us down. So the effect on the enterprise is that in the mainframe generation and then the mini-computer generation, we took all the systems of record, all of the stuff that was happening inside the organization, And we automated those internal transactions in the business. It was a very document-centric type of computing technology, because it was all about taking those old paper processes and digitizing them, computerizing them. And in a lot of cases, we're still at that stage of, we've only just got to the stage of automating the internal paper processes. So it's all focused on what happens inside the enterprise. But what is happening today with all of these smart devices and capabilities that are out there in the cloud is that we've now got this new generations of systems of engagement, and they're kind of in clouds in the slide, because very often they're delivered using the cloud or by software as a service, because they already have to interact with, this is how you interact across the cloud with your customers, with your outbound employees, with your partners, and therefore the cloud connection has to be built in, so it makes sense to actually go to the cloud for these services. And it's very much about automating interactions rather than transactions, and about having conversations, and therefore it's very outbound, it's very outward facing. And that, I think, is changing the application landscape of today's enterprises. So all these three-letter acronyms like ERP and CRM and HRM, etc., that we associated with the traditional enterprise computing landscape, they're still there, and obviously, like the mainframe, they're not going to go away, but all of the action and growth in the marketplace today is around these new systems of engagement that are connecting enterprises to their partners and their employees and their customers. Digital marketing, for example, which is a big umbrella term for everything from Salesforce automation through to marketing automation and email management and everything else. It's a huge sector where we see Salesforce.com becoming a multi-billion-dollar business now because of the strength of that marketplace. See a lot of investment in collaboration and social. People talking about Box, for example, highly funded startup which is going for IPO at the moment. Microsoft moving very much to Office 365 because they want to go online and play in this space more effectively, buying Yammer for messaging. Self-service and networking coming much more into play into HCM, not just in terms of things like talent management, but also in the use of LinkedIn for recruitment. The fact that people look for jobs now online increasingly, it's almost an entirely online process, whereas when I left college and started looking for work, I had to actually print out my CV and post it to people when I was looking for work. So these changes happening, and I think what is going to happen is that the old TLAs, they're almost dropping off the screen there, going into background, and this new wave of applications were going to be much more about connection. And underpinning it all, we have this backbone of things like data and analytics and integration, governance, and of course security, which we're talking about today, which really has to make it all work. So that's the broad picture. What does that all mean for the average business person who wants to get on with their life, and the average channel partner that has got to help them work with technology and make the best decisions? Well, one of the things that I always point out when I talk to an industry audience is don't be misled by the chatter about cloud computing into thinking that it's all about Amazon and Windows Azure. Because if you look at the market projections from respected analysts like IDC and Gartner and so on, this chart from IDC, that mid-blue bar in the middle, which is most of the market for public cloud, is software as a service. So most of the spend by enterprises is not buying real estate on cloud infrastructure so that they can take their computing workloads and put them into the cloud. It's actually going to ready-made business workloads, applications that they can start using instantly, like Salesforce.com, like McAfee security services, and so on. And this is a huge market. The SaaS market as a whole, the public cloud market as a whole, and SaaS within it, is growing at a remarkable 23.5% annually, according to this projection. So 20 to 25% is pretty typical for SaaS, and it has been ever since I started following it, which is 4 times faster than the growth in the IT industry as a whole. It is the coming space. Sagatech Technology, who've been following this very closely, were even surprised when they found last year in their annual survey of IT buyers worldwide that those budget holders expect 50% of their applications will be SaaS applications or cloud applications by 2015, next year. 50% of their entire portfolio, not just what they're buying. Gartner says by 2015, 85% of new application purchases will be SaaS. So what we're looking at is a lot of spend going into these applications around these systems of engagement to do with e-commerce, CRM, mobile, partner portals, whatever, connecting to all of these people that we increasingly have to work with as part of a collaborative real-time team in business today. And the systems of record, the ERP, is still churning along in the background, but all the excitement is happening in the cloud. Which brings up the question of, well, am I safe in the cloud? Because this is what people are always worried about when you're talking about taking the computing that they know and love and they trust and they're familiar with on-premise and entrusting it to someone else, which they've never done before. Or sometimes they've done it, but it hasn't always worked out well. And what I say to people who are thinking about this for the first time is, well, look at the computing you've already got. You've got smartphones and mobile, you've got your desktop clients, email systems, web server farms, and the legacy systems and data centers. Because business is increasingly connected today, half of that IT estate is already exposed to the cloud. You're already in the cloud. You can't go back, you can't turn the clock back. You're already there. And increasingly, most enterprises are thinking, well, how can I get my computing into the cloud? Because I've got to be connected. Do I build my own enterprise cloud, or do I go to public cloud, or do I have some kind of hybrid mix? And increasingly, as we've seen from the market research, people are turning to software as a service and platform as a service and infrastructure as a service to supplement what they're doing with their in-house computing, because they can't move that fast enough. They haven't got the resources to actually, and they haven't got the knowledge actually, to run cloud infrastructure. So they need to use third parties. So, really the way to look at this is that every enterprise is becoming a cloud provider of their business to their business partners, to their customers. And they have to function safely and securely in the cloud. Whether they are moving to SaaS and Amazon and whatever else, or whether they're still keeping it on-premise, but they've got to do it securely, and they've got to be aware of all these cloud risks. And we confuse ourselves with the terminology that we use, because people talk as if going into the cloud and signing up for an application is a terribly risky thing, because anyone else can go up to the same provider and also sign up for the same application. It's a bit like saying, well, I don't want to go to a high street bank and put my money there because that's where everyone else goes. So, public banking and private banking, keeping your money under the bed. You don't go around saying these days, I'm going to keep my money under the bed because it's safer having my own private bank in-house than it is using one of these high street banks that anyone can go to. Well, of course you don't do that. And I think we've got confused about the fact that because the internet is public and connected and everyone can use it, and if you go onto Google and do a search, you can find out anything in the world, then you automatically think that if you put your data into Salesforce.com, or if McAfee is looking after your email, then that means that every kind of Tom, Dick and Harry on the internet can see your data. But of course you can't, because what you're doing is you're signing up to services that access to those services is public, but you have to hand over your money, you have to have a login and a password which you look after very carefully, and sometimes it's even two-factor authentication to make sure it's even safer and more secure. And your data is safe in those clouds because it's in a section of the cloud which is private to you. And believe me, the cloud providers are putting a huge amount of investment into making sure that their clouds are as safe can be. And they are probably able to afford much better, more effective security hardware and professionals than an individual mid-market business can. So the cloud threat landscape is not just about the stuff that you're signing up to into the cloud, but it's also about all the stuff that you've already got that is in the cloud or is cloud-facing or touching the cloud. And that's what you've got to protect against all of these threats that are out there, all of these security threats. So when you go in to talk to one of your customers, I think that's the thing you need to talk about. You need to talk about, is their data already safe? What is the benchmark they're measuring this up against? Does on-premises actually mean under the stairs or in the wiring cabinet? Because if it does, that's probably not a very safe place to keep your data. Well, when you're talking to people about security in the cloud, remember also that they're not technology people. And when they use the word security, they don't automatically think of firewalls and encryption and stuff like that, like we do. They're using the term much more broadly. So yes, it does include security against network attacks and vulnerabilities and all the stuff that we're talking about today. But it also includes things like, well, is the service going to be up when I sign in tomorrow? It's things like, is it going to actually still be what I need next year? Will I get locked into a relationship that doesn't work for me? What are they doing with my data? Am I going to actually be breaking data privacy regulations if I use a cloud service? So those sorts of questions you need to be aware of and ready to answer. And one of the great things about SaaS is that it helps you answer those questions. Because, of course, a SaaS provider is already making sure that their systems are always available and reliable when needed, because they've got thousands of customers, and if they weren't on and up 24/7 for all those customers, then they'd be out of business. And they constantly have to attract new customers, so they're constantly making sure that their technology is up to date with the needs of the market. And all of their customers benefit from the fact that they're keeping everything up to date and having the best possible features for the new prospects that they want to attract. So it's automatically future-proofed. Obviously, if we're talking about pay-as-you-go contracts, you're also avoiding getting locked in. So SaaS deals with a lot of those things. Now, I'm not going to go into the data privacy thing because European law is an issue, and if you want to ask me about that, because of my work with an organisation called Eurocloud, I can talk to you about that. But I can assure you also that the SaaS providers, particularly those who operate at a global level, are very concerned with making sure that they're compliant with data privacy and making sure that you're not going to be in a situation where you don't understand what the regulations are that are going to affect you. But the key point I'm making here is that these conversations about security drill down and understand what risk the customer is actually worried about. This is all about risk assessment. It's not just about firewalls and antivirus, important though those things are. So let's have a look at the cloud-based security market. First of all, like any part of the SaaS market, this is a rapidly growing marketplace. This is Gartner's global market size projection for cloud-based security services. And we're talking about, so we're in the middle of this, we're between those two bars, $2.1 billion worldwide last year. Next year, 50% bigger than that, 3.1 billion. For some reason, the 3D has done something weird with the scale. So it should actually be reading 3.0 on the on the index on the left there rather than 2.4. You will have to take my word for it that when I put the figures into the chart in PowerPoint, I did put 3.1 on that big one, and for some reason, best known to Microsoft, PowerPoint has decided to downgrade it. But look at that growth figure, 48% growth. This is where the action is, over 2 years, 48%, which is consistent with the 25% a year roughly that we talked about earlier. So what's it made up of? Well, you know, email security is a big part of that. Like I said, I was briefed by McAfee 15 years ago, when they launched. I was also being briefed by email security providers. People like Postini, for example, are now no longer with us in that form. But you know, protecting email against attachments that contain Trojans and other malware, protecting it against links that will take you to places that you shouldn't be going, all that kind of thing. Is a huge marketplace because the email is one of the most common channels for infection to get into a computer network. And of course the email, increasingly as people sign in for services, email becomes the gateway to all of the data that that person has access to. So it's incredibly important to connect to protect email. The other big area of the market is web security, protecting your website and to making sure that when people go to a website, they're not going to find that when they leave the page, they're actually, unbeknown to them, ended up with some rogue code downloaded to their machine. Again, a big area of infection that affects people, and you know, these distributed denial of service attacks that we sometimes hear about, taking down big services, are being run by bots that are running from thousands or millions of infected machines. So a lot of them are business websites that are not properly protected against this type of infection. Some other up-and-coming areas. Identity and access is going to be increasingly important as people have more applications that they log into online, and doing things like single sign-on is a good way of doing that. Encryption, increasingly important as people think about data privacy. Encrypting your data before you put it into a cloud provider is one way of protecting it further, and reporting and monitoring on all of the activity that's happening in your computing is a growing field as well. But the largest part of the market is web threat and messaging security. So you know, this is the global figure. We talked about 3.1 billion worldwide from Gartner. Now, you know, Analyst, different researchers, so there may be slightly different assumptions that they've made, but 2015 they're talking about 2 billion here just on web threat and messaging, which includes email. So the largest part of the market by far at the moment, because it's the most established, are these two areas of web threat security and email and messaging security. The other thing to highlight here is the growth in this marketplace, that we're looking at 19% growth, so very much into the kind of towards 20% growth figure. And the other thing I would point out on this chart is that the growth is accelerating, because there's a curve here if you look at the bars as they go through. So most of the higher growth is still ahead of us in this market. Let's look at the UK within that, because this is not just something that's happening in the US or elsewhere in the world. This is actually a market today in the UK. 2013 figure is already nudging 200 million US dollars, which is about 120 million pounds. So that is the market that is available for us to participate in today. And by 2015, it's going to be shooting up above the 200 million mark, up to a final figure there of 300 million in just a few years' time. And that translates to about 2 million UK. So Again, the growth pretty much in line with the worldwide growth, a little bit slower because I think the UK is still in catch-up, but again, look at the trend and look at those big leaps, particularly in 2016 and 2017, as the UK starts to catch up with the global trend. So this is the opportunity. The businesses that you're talking to have all of these threats to worry about, and by adding security into the cloud that they're accessing, then you can make their life much easier. Let's talk a little bit about SME market adoption in the UK. This is a Paris-based European research group, PAC, very highly respected, and they did a projection a couple of years ago based on the UK adoption of software as a service by the SME marketplace. And so they found that it was already above 200 million, this is in pounds, in 2011, and growing over the 4 years 170% to be more than £500 million in size by 2015, which is next year. Now that's all of SaaS. Interesting to look back at, we said that the SaaS market for, or the market for cloud-based security services was about £120 million. So for that to be maybe about 20 to 25% of the total market might surprise you. But actually, email and antivirus and web protection have been a big part of the market for quite a long time because it's very easy and it actually makes sense to deliver that from the cloud, particularly because the cloud is the only place where you get a really up-to-date impression of, or actually up-to-date data about where the threats are and what the latest threats are coming that are affecting people. And so it's always been a big part of the market. Obviously, other big parts of the market are things like CRM, collaboration, and so on. But it's one of the best kept secrets of IT that IT have always been quite early adopters of SaaS for their own functions at the same time as they're preventing everyone else in the business from signing up for SaaS applications. But we've seen a lot of adoption of security in the SaaS field, a lot of adoption of IT help desk delivered as a service. So the IT marketplace, I think, is already quite mature for SaaS. Here's the interesting thing. If you ignore the SaaS market, you're stuck in a conventional market, which, yes, is still growing. Over that 4-year period, we'll put in 11% growth, pretty meager on an annual basis. Might just keep ahead of the inflation rate, but only because the inflation's so low these days. Or you can go with SaaS, which is 170% over that same period. The growth in the IT marketplace, in the software marketplace, is in SaaS. And as you see, because the growth is so much outpacing conventional software, it's becoming an increasingly large proportion of the market. So it's growing to 2015 in this projection to somewhere between 20 and 25% of the market. But what other people are saying to other researchers is that, well, 50% of my spend is going to be SaaS by 2015. So the expectation by buyers is actually outpacing even the market projections. It may be that because this is a 2012 projection and they haven't updated it since, it may be that if they did it again today, they would actually find a bigger figure in 2015 for SaaS. Certainly there's no sign of SaaS slowing down at the moment. But the small business market, the mid-market business and small enterprise market in the UK is still something of a laggard. Because the fact is that SMEs, whether they're in engineering or construction or logistics or retail, they don't actually want to have to think about IT because they've got businesses to run. And so traditionally, they have turned to partners like many of the companies represented in this room to sort their IT for them. And today, of course, they have to have so much more IT because they've got to do all these systems of engagement as well as the systems of record and all of as well as email. They've got to have email security as well as websites. They've got to have website security. There's a lot more for them to talk to their partners about. They need help from you. Of course, the other thing they can do is they can go and just sign up for services online and cut out the middleman. And that, they would rather not do that, I can assure you. It would take them a lot of persuasion, of self-persuasion, to actually say, well, I'm going to do this on my own. I'm not going to get help with it. Because, they don't want the extra management resource taking their attention away from business. So they do depend on partners. But if the partners are going to not be there and are not going to be there to help them, then they'll end up with no choice. And so it is important to actually get up to speed and be ready to help them as they confront this question of what do I do with cloud. And one of the things that holds them back is that it is disruptive. We're talking the yin and yang of computing here. On-premise computing has one way of doing things. Cloud computing, it's very different. You're changing to a completely different, hopefully a more friendly user interface, but there's still retraining and change management involved. How you integrate everything is completely different. The security and governance, there are new risks that you have to be aware of and cater to. And so there are all kinds of different ways of dealing with software as a service and cloud services that are unfamiliar. And therefore, there is this huge need for someone to be that helping hand, to take that SME, whether it's an IT department or whether it's a business manager who's got responsibility for IT, whatever the size of organisation, they are counting on experts helping them make this move in the most accurate way. It's a very confusing, unfamiliar territory, and so you can provide a lot of value by giving them the guidance as to when is the right time to make the change, why they should be making the change, sourcing the right products and services, and then helping with the implementation, getting it working with all their other computing, and then building it out as they grow their implementation. I'm going to round off by coming back to cloud business models, because there's a huge change going on in the economy and in the business marketplace. And I think it bears re-emphasising. And also, it's fun to look at this stuff. I always like to say to people, with the cloud, the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. There is enormous capability just waiting for you to reach out and grab it and use it on demand. And there's also enormous opportunity for people in the IT business, new fields where the growth rate, as I've said, is enormous, where the business that's out there today to be grabbed is counted in tens and hundreds of millions of pounds. But what you need to do is realise that this is a different marketplace where the day-to-day costs and the acquisition costs of the actual systems is being driven down to commodity levels, where the price of a server is really being measured in pence on Amazon today. And so delivering the underlying computing infrastructure is becoming a less valuable business. Where the value is in delivering those business outcomes, which is one of the reasons why SaaS is being successful, because with SaaS, the computing's done, you just need to start getting the business value out of it. And you can get it that much faster as well. So there's a huge time to market advantage in turning to a SaaS and a cloud-based solution. And what this chart does, I think, really sums this up. In the old computing world, and this is why there's still so much opportunity and value, I think, for channel partners. 'Cause in the old world, every customer used to install their own server, for each separate application. And most of the time, most of that server resource was not actually used. You know, if you look at a typical on-premises enterprise data center, whether you're looking at a large business or a small business, and actually this is particularly true for mid-sized businesses for like 100 to 1,000 servers in use, something like 4% resource utilization. Because most of the time that capacity is not being fully used. Whereas in a properly set up cloud data center, you can get up to around 60% utilization. You don't want to go a bit higher than that because then you actually don't have enough resource available for failover. But you can go from going from 4% to 60% resource utilization. Imagine how much cost that takes out of not just the acquisition cost, but also the running costs. And there's hugely more that can be done with running costs once you've got everything in a proper cloud data center. I think Google has one administrator for each 1,000 servers in its data center, and those are probably old figures, so it's probably even better numbers now. It is hugely efficient to run the cloud. And you take all that cost away. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but enterprise IT budgets are not going down. They're probably maybe flat, but they're still spending as much as they used to. Even when they are going to SaaS and cloud, they're still spending the money, but they're not spending it on wasted server resource anymore. And so when we talk about the cloud, we're not talking about disintermediation of the channel. We're not talking about commodity pricing when we look at the actual application level. What we're talking about is a lot more value being delivered for the price because the customer is not spending that money anymore on resources that are not being properly utilized. And so there's a huge amount of value being released that can then be spent on higher level activities and on applications. Now, you do have to adjust to a different revenue pattern when you move to the cloud. You're not going to get that upfront implementation spend when you sign a contract anymore. There's a certain amount of spend that you can get for implementation and configuration, but you'll be lucky if it's a 2-to-1 ratio as opposed to the old ratios that we used to have. And so, typically you see a much less value in year one, but on the other hand, you have much more predictable value over the continuing years of the contract. And so you do need to adjust, therefore, your business model to those revenue cycles, which are smoother, but spread over a longer time. It affects, for example, how you think about sales compensation. And you probably need to build in some way of being able to compensate the salespeople in the first year out of that reduced revenue from the first year, and look forward to the profit coming in subsequent years. So there's some adjustments to make, but this is an adjustment which is necessary because the world is changing. We are now all connected into this enormous and incredible computing resource, and we're connected on mobile, wherever we are, with the capability in our pockets with incredibly sophisticated digital computing devices that enable us to be much more productive and efficient wherever we are. Even social, which is not just for meaningless chatter, but is also increasingly important for collaboration and teamwork within business and partnership across business boundaries and with customers. And we are just on the threshold of the new emergence of what's called the Internet of Things. This is illustrated here by the Nest thermostat, which has been a runaway success. And this Internet of Things means that not just the people are now being connected, but the stuff is being connected as well, and collecting all kinds of metrics that can provide context around the things that we do. and make our interactions more meaningful. Sometimes a little bit big brothery, and there need to be kind of privacy protections built around that as well. But overall, what is happening, in the words of Mark Andreessen, who founded Netscape and is now a successful venture capitalist, software is eating the world. I would extend that and say that it's connected software that's eating the world. What he's talking about is the fact that there's a whole swathe of new businesses that, because they use software to do new things or to do old things in new ways, and because they use network connectivity to use resources more effectively, to bring people together faster, to complete transactions more quickly, then you have this new wave of businesses that are disrupting and destroying, in some cases, pre-existing businesses. So examples that he would cite, for example, all about being more networked. So Netflix, by providing video on demand over the internet, rather than people having to go to Blockbuster stores and renting videos physically, use the network to disintermediate the old way of getting movies. Airbnb is the accommodation website which is linking up people's spare rooms with travellers that need rooms, and is disintermediating the hotel industry. Uber's using the network to connect up spare cars with people that want a car and can't be bothered using the old broken taxi service in many cities. And of course Amazon, we know, is delivering computing in a wholly new way. People talk about a concept of syndicated commerce. This is from made up by a Wells Fargo analyst as a term, but is visible in, for example, an organisation called Deem that is building a network where a traveller can arrive at an airport having booked a car to take them to their hotel, and because the network knows where they come from, what they have previously bought, and where they're going to stay, can suggest restaurants that are available that night that have offers that are the kind of restaurants that they like or people like them go to. And so we're moving away from having to advertise into an environment where purchasing suggestions get given to you in context as you're going about your daily business. And all of this happens because of people being connected, companies exchanging data, using the power of big data to analyse that information and provide useful results to people that greases the wheels of commerce. And so, my final message to you is that it's all about being ready for this connected world. It's about having the awareness of what's happening. It's about having the IT infrastructure, often cloud-based, that enables you to participate and to take advantage of these connected commercial networks that are evolving, that have increasing amounts of intelligence that help people make smart buying decisions.